Tusnek, any questions here before we get started? You good to go?
Nothing at the top of my head. I think I'm ready to go.
Okay.
Good luck.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Sequence Break, episode 46, Tusnek. Here he is. Tusnek, how you doing, man?
Not too bad. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for being here and taking the time. I really do appreciate this. A little bit of why I reached out to you and why I'm so excited to talk some Castlevania. Castlevania was one of those elusive games back in the day as a kid growing up that, okay, I could get past the first level and then had no clue what was after that because I couldn't get past, something that kept getting in. It was just one of those really challenging games for me as a kid. And I've recently been revisiting them as an adult. And I've gone through all the NES games now, and I've gone through Rondo of Blood and now Genesis Bloodlines, the Bloodlines game. And I have literally fallen in love with this series. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to chat some Castlevania with you because it's awesome. It's such a fun series of games to play. I don't know if you feel the same way at all, but man, what a great game. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk a little Castlevania and some other, and speedrunning and all that kind of stuff with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for asking me to do this. I always love chatting with new people, getting to know new people, and obviously talking about Castlevania. Castlevania is a great franchise. I'm a little bitter that it doesn't get the same level of love as other like classic franchises like Zelda do. Like Zelda had one game on NES and Castlevania had 3. It's like, come on. And
Yes.
the Castlevania soundtrack just like in every single game just slaps. So it's like, guys. I love good video game music. Do you?
And that's the thing. That's one thing that goes underrated. I think a little bit about picking up a speedrun is you're going to be resetting a bunch of times, and if the music is good, you don't dread resetting it. Like just having that soundtrack go every single time. It's just, oh man, it's killer. It's great.
Absolutely. That's criteria number 1 for me when I choose a speedrun to play is am I into the soundtrack? If so, let's go. Totally,
man. Totally. Oh man, it's such a important part of it. So let's start from the beginning. When did you kind of get your start in gaming? As a wee lad, as a kid, and was Castlevania a part of that at all?
Yeah, it kind of was actually. So my mom and her friend Melanie were just really into Nintendo. So some of my earliest memories of that were of them just playing Nintendo games. And it's got a lot of the classics in there like Super Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt, Zelda, but also Castlevania 1. I remember being a kid watching them play Castlevania 1 and being like in awe of how awesome this game was. And just like how, of course I wasn't thinking about things in these terms, but like, aesthetically it's very clean. The themes were very cool. The music was awesome. And I really loved Castlevania 1. And then a couple years later, when we had our own Nintendo, we had Castlevania 2, which, as you probably know, is a much different monster.
Yes.
And I played it a lot, but I always wanted Castlevania 1. It was like that. It was that game that I could never seem to find at the rental stores. None of my friends had it. I had these I had it up on a pedestal from like my memories. Like even when I was like 9 years old, I was nostalgic of my 5-year-old memories, of Castlevania 1. And I remember I kept asking for it for Christmas. And then one year I asked for it for Christmas and my parents got me Castlevania 3, which of course is a great game and a more accessible game for a child than Castlevania 2 is, which I kind of feel, excuse me, is a little silly saying because Castlevania 3 is extremely difficult. But,
right.
But I remember thinking like, wow, this is great, but it's not Castlevania 1, and that's what I really want. Yeah, Castlevania was a big part of that. But also like my dad never really played very many games except, for like card games like bridge, poker, stuff like that. But I was into that stuff too. I was into like, playing, even solitaire by myself or playing Uno with my friends or my family or board games or whatever. So video games, board games. Eventually, I kind of crept into like collectible card games like Magic and other things like, I played the Star Wars and the Lord of the Rings card games quite a bit. And then, yeah, just all kinds of games from then on. Okay. I'm not as into like board games lately, but it's all over the place. Yeah. Games. I love games.
That's really cool. I shouldn't have bbeen surprised, but the first GDQ I ever went to, there was quite a bit of Magic going on, and I shouldn't have been surprised that there's that overlap between speedrunners and card games. It's competitive. It's you have to think through decisions. Like it was kind of an obvious one once you think about it. But then I'm like, oh man, there's a lot of people into because I was into the game too. So I now play more Hearthstone than anything because it's just like I can load it up quickly and get a game in. But do you still play any of the card games or anything like that still today?
Not too much these days. I've kind of fallen in love with these deck building games like Dominion, Ascension, Shards of Infinity, stuff
absolutely.
like that. And I think they're just, I think that's a relatively young genre of kind of like board games. And you know, I every generation of new games that come out, they seem to be getting better and better. Remember when Dominion came out, I was like, wow, this is great, I really love this. But then Ascension came out and I was like, oh, this is just strictly better than Dominion. Like Dominion has like all these concepts that I just don't think actually make for it. And then now I'm playing Shards of Infinity. I'm like, well, this is just better than Ascension, you know. So I'm really hyped about that. But I got into Hearthstone for a little bit. Hearthstone was really good. I think Hearthstone's great because it was designed for the electronic interface.
Right.
You know, I've played a lot of Magic. I played a lot of Magic Online, and I haven't dabbled too much with MTG Arena, which I've heard good things about. But Magic Online was always such a chore because Magic, of course, was not designed for an electronic interface. And there's whole like this priority passing stuff that's just extremely tedious. Whereas Hearthstone it's my turn, I'm going to play my turn, and then it's going to be your turn, and you're going to play your turn. Yes. And I might have a trap or something, but you know, for the most part, it's really, really straightforward, and I like it a lot for that.
Makes it quick and easy. Arena is basically what has gotten me back into Magic because it's one of those things where, to your point, you don't need. I was somebody who hadn't played for, I don't know, 15 years. And so I don't remember, you know, I didn't know any of the new mechanics or anything like that. And Arena is one of those things that brought me back into it. And it's, but once again, it's just one of those things. It's speedrunning. I've seen a lot of speedrunners now in the Arena thing because it's accessible and it brings us back. It's easy to get a game going online, to say the least. Question about, you mentioned CV2 as a kid. That had to have been. Were you able to beat it as a kid? I'm just curious.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. I do have some, you know, like I don't really remember beating it at all, but I do have some vague memories of like Dracula's Castle, you know, because like everybody likes to hate on Dracula's Castle because there's like no enemies in it, right? It's just a walk all the way, you know, so it kind of feels like an unfinished game. But I do have some memories of that happening. So I don't know if, you know, I was playing with an adult that was able to beat it, and I was watching, or, you know, maybe I snagged like a password out of like a game guide or something, and I used it to teleport to the end. I don't really remember how I got there, but I do have some memories of the end of the game, but I'm sure I didn't beat it. I was not a clever child. I'm not a clever adult, but I'm definitely not. I definitely was not a clever child, so I definitely didn't get there.
So I just played through CV2 probably about 4 or 5 months ago, and I was fortunate enough to have Speedrunner in the chat helping me get through it, Glitchwitch, and I didn't. As an adult, I couldn't figure out how you're supposed to beat this, especially back in the day, without having. I mean, I guess you'd get a guide, but I don't remember guides only existing like Nintendo Power. So I really was just curious how people beat that game back in the day. But I enjoyed
think the joke is that it was like a Nintendo Power game that you really needed a guide to be able to beat because it's so obtuse and cryptic. And really the icing on the cake is, and I didn't know this until a couple of years ago, but people like to say like, oh, you know, some of the stuff was lost in translation. And while that's true, that's only a marginal impact on what the actual clue system was. The clue system, about half the clues are actually misinformation, so they're designed to throw you off the trail. It's so stupid. Like, I love the game, but I admit it's overly cryptic and obtuse, and if they didn't go so hard on that, I think it would be a great game, but instead it's the black sheep of the franchise.
I totally agree. Like, the thing I loved about it, it felt like this really big world, and it's got this night and day. Like, it's got a lot of stuff that's super interesting and fun to play through, to be honest with you. But then, to your point, I'm like, is this game trolling me? Like, is it purposely trying to just mess with me? Anyway.
It is.
Totally fun. So when did you first discover speedrunning? How did speedrunning become a thing that you became aware of?
Yeah, so I guess about a little over 3 years ago now, one of my homegirls at work at my last job, Molly, she got really into and this is probably a familiar story, but she got really into the Summoning Salt World Record progression videos. And she started sending them to me, and, you know, I would just like, yeah, I'll take a break and watch a YouTube video over lunch at work or whatever. And, you know, the first thing I'm seeing is like, oh my God, like, this is like so insane, right? Like, these people have to be putting like tons of hours into this. This is totally not accessible, because the last competitive gaming I'd done up until that point was something that was like a League of Legends sort of game, where you really needed to play like 3 or 4 hours a day just to maintain like the ability to win 50% of the time in a casual sense. You know, it was just totally brutal. Right. So I'm used to, I'm like really sensitive to this time drain, you know, and I'm sitting there watching these and I'm like, these seem like huge time drains. And I watched the Castlevania. I watched a couple of speedruns for games that I had played when I was a kid. I watched Castlevania. I watched Ninja Gaiden, And I was like blown away when I watched Ninja Gaiden and they were able to spin slash through the boss. And I was like, wait, what's happening here? And I didn't understand how spin slash works. And I thought that the speedrunners were actually just like mashing like extremely fast or something. I totally didn't get it. But then I watched a video about Super Metroid. And the part of the Super Metroid game video that really stood out to me was they talked about Behemoth kind of going dark with some of his like research buddies and coming up with a completely new route, which of course redefined the meta for Super Metroid.
Changed the game.
And now like he's Behemoth the record from, I think it was Zost or something. So I was like, I think that's like, and I think this may be a controversial opinion because I think a lot of people think that it's whack to like withhold strats and like use them to do like heavy research and then like beat a record but I think that's totally cool. And it reminded me a lot of like when I was playing competitive card games. It was the Lord of the Rings card game at the time. I had a research group and like we all lived together and we built new decks and play tested new decks every single day in preparation for the first season of like the competitive tournament series. And like in secret, we came up with this pretty broken deck and we did not share the idea with anybody. And we went to a convention in, I think it was Origins in Columbus, and we just cleaned house with this deck. So I kind of like, I felt a little nostalgia when I was like, oh, these guys are like, they're in the lab, and they're coming up with these cool strats. And I was like, actually, this seems pretty cool. And Molly was like, hey, do you want to learn how to speedrun in Castlevania? I've been playing it on my 3DS. And I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds fun. So I downloaded the ROM and I started playing. And Molly was kind of all over the map. She got a new interest every month. So she moved on to motorcycles and I stuck with speedrunning, and here we are.
And that's how it goes down. It's interesting you mentioned Salt. First of all, Salt's actually been on the podcast. We've talked about the storytelling aspect, and I think he has been a wonderful conduit to get people into speedrunning and to be interested in. There's a lot of history that goes along with it at this point that thankfully somebody is keeping track of some of this stuff, because sometimes some of this stuff gets lost. But then secondly, it's if you haven't yet, and most people who are watching this or have seen this or have probably seen the Salt video on Castlevania, but it's such a great way to see where a game has started and where a game ends up just at the time of the finish of the video. Because even since the end of the Salt video, which I think is over a year old now, I watched it in prep for our chat. There's been new things and new discoveries and new strats even since the end of Salt, the newest video. So a great point to bring up. And I know my older brother he doesn't know anything about speedrunning, but Summoning Salt, the videos have popped up on his YouTube. He's watched them. He's now a fan. He totally gets it. It's been a great way to see some of that stuff. I want to touch on something you mentioned there, because I think that's really interesting. And it's kind of a different opinion, and maybe it is controversial. I'm not sure, but so much of the speedrunning community we hear about, everyone shares, and we're all and you can still be friendly and still practice a strat that maybe you feel, or that might be new information for the community. At some point, it's going to get shared anyway. You're going to have to submit if you're any sort of competitive person. And I think it's interesting, because I think it's perfectly a valid approach to speedrunning. It wouldn't be the way that I would do it, but I still think that there's validity. And that's the great thing about speedrunning is we can all approach it any way we want to. And that was Behemoth's, that's the way that he chose, and with some people, maybe he'd been helping him out. That's the way that he chose to approach that strat. I thought it's really interesting that, keeping it like that.
Yeah. Like you said, like the speedrunning community is really into sharing knowledge, and it seems like the mission is more about driving the game's time down than it is for any individual to be successful. But I'll be honest with you. There was one time I was sitting at work one day and I had an idea for a skip in Castlevania 2, and I hadn't tested it yet, but I was like, if this works, this could save a ton of time. And I told myself that if this worked, I was going to do offline attempts for world record until I got it. So, and I feel a little shady admitting that, because the one of the strats that I used in my most recent PBs was actually developed by one of my competitors, SPD Wolf, who had the record at the time. And he was like, he came up with a strat, and he was working on, he is working on Donkey Kong Country 2. And he was like, hey, I think I have the strat, and you're back to the game, so I want to see if you can incorporate it. So he kicked it over to me and showed me how to do it. And I did. So, he's a great guy, and the community is great. And it's usually like that, it's usually like that.
No,
but that was like a 0.5 second time save, and not like a 3 second or 4 second
right, it was game breaking or anything. Yeah.
That's how I justify it, but like, yeah.
No. And I think that's the thing I think that's kind of interesting about the community, though, is that by nature, admittedly, okay, let me back this up. A lot of us are competitive who do speedrunning. Yes, it's being competitive with ourselves because we're just trying to, beat our times and whatever time may exist. But so like I said, I don't see, I think I see it as just a different approach to doing what we do. And I think that's really cool. And that there is a different way. You can approach speedrunning any way you want. That's what I think is pretty awesome about what we do. So just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I agree.
So what was the first game then you ended up speedrunning? Was it Castlevania or was it a different game?
No, it was Castlevania.
Okay.
And it's kind of still what I'm on now. I've picked up a couple of games like more casually here and there, but yeah, for the most part, I would say that my main game is Castlevania, and it was my first.
Awesome. Let's get to it then. So what makes Castlevania kind of unique as a speedrun from, like, say, other games, Mario or Zelda, like other games people might be aware of?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Something I really appreciate about Castlevania is that it's very accessible. I think it's relatively easy to get. So I think like a Ninja Gaiden, they have like the Ninja license. That's like, if you get sub 12 minutes and 30 seconds, then you have your Ninja license. I would say the equivalent time in Castlevania 1 is a sub 12 minute time. But with I think a lot of the strats that have come out lately have I would say that for the majority of my time playing the game have a lot of them have been improving, like the speed at which you can do something or get to a certain point, but a lot of them have just increased the consistency of how to get there the fastest way possible. And I think with these new strats that don't really save time over the old strats, but that makes getting the best time a lot easier. It's a really accessible game, and somebody can get a sub 12 minute time without too much effort. We just wrapped up a tournament season for Castlevania, and I in preparation for that, I kind of did like a tutorial on my stream one day, and there was this guy that was just sitting at work one day just looking at my channel, and he told me afterwards he got a sub 12 minute time like pretty fast, and he was like, yeah, I was just chilling in your chat one day and you were going over it, and I was like, yeah, I think I could learn this game. And he just used those strats that I came up with, which were like, these are supposed to be like tournament safe, marathon safe strats that are supposed to be easy for anybody to do, and like bam, sub 12 minute time. So that's really appealing. But also there's so much RNG manipulation. There's so much frame perfect stuff in the game that it kind of has a low floor, but a relatively high ceiling. A game like Mario is really tough, right? Like we just saw the world record of Mario get broken again this past week, which was crazy. I didn't expect that to get broken for a long time. And, that game has an excessive number of very exact inputs, right? Which is awesome. And it's awesome that humans can push themselves to do this. But I think a way that Castlevania is different than a game like that is not only do we have this precision platforming where we're having to do a lot of frame perfect, platforming, but we're also in combat. Mario's never in combat, right? Mario's just avoiding everything and getting through the level, So we're in combat and we're having to kill bosses or kill enemies as fast as possible. And so, there's a lot more to optimize over a 12-minute run that involves something more than just platforming. And I don't mean to suggest that I think Castlevania is as advanced or mature as Mario is, but it's different. And I think that it's different from a lot of other games in this way, which is, I think so. I don't know. I guess that's my answer.
No, it's a great answer. And that's one of the things I noticed right away on a casual playthrough, a blind playthrough, was that the mechanics just by themselves, the character controls, unlike any other character really I've played in games before. And I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but like the way, just like the jumping, not being able to change your jump in midair, and the speed at which, is it Trevor or Richter? Which one's Castlevania? Is it Richter?
Castlevania 1's Simon. Castlevania 1 and 2 are Simon, and Trevor's in 3.
Apologies. Too many. I'm getting all the Belmonts mixed up here. But so just the way that's, the speed at which Simon moves at and the attacks that he has, I really feel like that it really adds this unique quality to your point, because I noticed by the time, it took me about 10 hours to beat the first Castlevania. And by like hour 8 and 9, I was feeling really good about the way that I could control the character. And so to your point, like it's a speed run that is surprisingly more accessible than I thought it was going to be, especially seeing all of you do it at such a high level, So, but that's interesting that, so what are some of the RNG elements that you mentioned? Because that's something I watch your stream. I watched the race this weekend. Like I really have been trying to get into it, and it's sometimes tough to tell what are some of those RNG elements, but like I was watching the semifinals with you and SPD, and like you were a few seconds ahead, but it looked like you were executing both at the same level. So what are some of those RNG elements that affect the timing?
Yeah, so I think the two biggest RNG elements are like what kind of patterns do enemies give you, and what kind of items do they drop. So the easy and this is rather simple, but almost everything in the game is driven by what frame you encounter the event on, and usually that frame counter starts at 0 every single time you enter a new screen. So it's not like you have to like, you know, chase some global timer through the entire game like you do in a game like Ninja Gaiden, right? Or even Super Mario Brothers. You need to stay on the same frame rule throughout the game to get the right RNG for like your bullet bill glitch, right? But in Castlevania, most of the time, the frame counter starts at 0 every time you enter a new screen, and everything, for the most part, there are some unknown elements there, but for the most part, everything will behave a certain way based on how many frames you lose. And when I say when you lose frames, let's say that I jump off a platform versus walking off a platform. If I'm jumping off, then I'm doing an arc right there, so I'm doing kind of like diagonal motion versus like this like 90-degree motion, right? And so jumping off is going to get me there faster than walking off. So if there's an enemy at the end of that hall there, if I jump off, I'm going to get a different pattern than I do that if I walk off. And sometimes it's actually better to walk off because we get a faster pattern that way. So sometimes you go slow on purpose to get better stuff later on. So almost every enemy in the game is manipulated in this way that does have manipulatable RNG. So we're talking like, do the birds swoop high? Do they swoop low? Do they come straight at your face? Does the skeleton, you know, throw a bone and then jump towards you, or does it jump towards you and then throw a bone? So almost every enemy in the game is manipulated in this way.
That's pretty nice.
The second way,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the second way that we're manipulating RNG is like how items drop. So sometimes when you kill an enemy, it can drop like a sub weapon, or it can drop like a potion or something like this on you, right? So we track a value and a memory address throughout the entire run that actually doesn't get cleared per level. So you actually have to track it throughout the entire run. Oh, wow. And there are some levels, especially level 3, where you are very much trying to manipulate certain items in certain orders to get through screens as fast as possible. And an enemy typically drops an item 1 out of every 16 frames. So we're tracking that 16 frame cycle and trying to kill the enemy on the right frame to get the item to drop so that we can get through as fast as possible. So those are the two biggest pieces of RNG manipulation in a game.
So that's super interesting. So if you're practicing, or if you're attempting practice RTA wise, you can use save states and set them up at, you know, before a room opens. So you'd be on you wouldn't have to worry about frame rules that way. But then on the global one, man, is that just one of those things where you just have to start runs from the beginning, or how would you go about practicing things like that?
I don't know. That's a good question. When I started to learn Ninja Gaiden, what I did is I tried to beat every screen as fast as possible. But what I would do is I would make a save state right before the end of the screen so that I could simulate delay and then move into the subsequent screen, you know, a little bit later or much later, just to kind of see how the hammer bros would interact with me. So in like a global timer situation, that's how I would approach it. The global timer situation in Castlevania is still a little bit of a black box. We haven't fully understood what exactly drives it, and it's only because there's only one part in the game that it seems to matter, and nobody has done a super high level of research to figure out why. And I don't have an excuse. We just haven't done it.
Well, but you mentioned this almost at the beginning of when we started, that the Castlevania community was not the people who are actually doing the work and the running and stuff. It's not as big as the Mario community. Like, you can just look at the runs that are submitted and stuff, and that was surprising a bit to me because the Salt video is very well viewed. These are all these popular runs at GDQs and other live events, and I think I take a step back and I remember that Castlevania is still an intimidating game, and I know I was intimidated at approaching it even in my 30s. So I'm like, maybe that's something. I don't know if that's one of those things that prevents people, or I don't know what it is, what prevents people from trying it out. But it's always great to have a larger number of people running the game or tasking the game and doing all those things to kind of break it and find out what some of those things are.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that Castlevania is probably in a golden age right now, and probably has been for the past few months, because there are a lot of eyes on the game right now relative to the past.
Sure.
And there's a new task that's about to drop pretty soon that is pretty significantly different than anything we've seen in the past. So I'm really excited to see that drop. I think it's getting reviewed by like whatever the board is that reviews tasks right now.
Judges, they call them judges at taskvideos.org.
Okay, cool. Judges. Yeah, it's being reviewed by judges right now, but it is pretty wild. I think a lot of that stuff is not really RTA viable, but
Sure.
I think a big reason why a couple of the big questions haven't been unlocked by the testers at this point is because a lot of the stuff in Castlevania is multi-factor RNG, and one of those factors typically is like what buttons you're holding at the time of the event. So it's really easy for a tester to just fiddle around with what inputs are being held down at any given point to get the desired RNG pattern. So there's not a big incentive there to really like reverse engineer the whole system and understand like, oh, okay, like, you know, and even if they did, it would probably boil down to some frame perfect shenanigans that are basically still unknown. So I don't know. We'll see. Someone should definitely investigate a couple of the skeleton pattern spots, but it's a big job. It's a big project. So we'll see.
Before this new task is released, what's the current difference between your world record and the task? Is there a big time? Because the game looks surprising. Your playthrough of it looks really optimized. So I'm curious what the difference is there.
Yeah, so you know, I don't know the number off the top of my head. I know that the timer on the task video is 11 minutes and 15 seconds, but task timing is different than RTA timing.
Yeah.
I think task timing goes from first input to last input.
Yeah.
So that it's going to include the start screen intro and all that stuff.
Got it. Okay.
I would say that there's probably between 15 and 20 seconds between my PB and the task that's about to be obsolete.
Got it. Awesome. Okay, cool. So then, you know, we're showing, if you're watching this on YouTube or whatever, there's a couple different videos that'll play here on the bottom corner. And this first one it was your first world record of the game. Do you have like at this point a favorite PB or a favorite run that maybe felt like a little bit different than some of the other runs that you've done, or one that sticks out in your mind?
This is kind of a bogus answer, but probably just the current one. I think, you know, like there was this really great video that came out it's probably been like 6 months now, but talking about the psychology behind why every speedrunner thinks that their PB is garbage. And I've always felt that way. I'm like, yeah, this is my best run ever, but look at all these glaring mistakes. And, you know, while there were mistakes or you know, things that were suboptimal in my current PB, it's definitely been the cleanest run I've ever done, and the run I've been the most proud of. It's got a lot in it. It's got a lot in it. There's definitely time to save, you know, but you know, I was chatting with a former world record holder that's de-rusting the game right now a couple of days ago, and I was like, "Oh, are you gonna go for world record?" And he's like, "No, your PB's way too good." I was like, "Nice, that feels good to hear." That feels good to hear. So definitely I think my current PB is up there. I think a runner-up would probably be my first sub 12-minute time, because that run for my skill at the time was extremely good. My PB was 12:01, and it had been a very marginal progression since then. It went from like 12:07 to 12:04 to 12:03 to 12:01, and I'm expecting to get like a 12 and then like a 12.01, you know, and then an 11:59. But I got straight from 12:01 to 11:45 with like the run of my life, like 3 gold splits during the run, and I'm just on top of the world. I'm like, oh my god, this is insane, you know. And that PB took me a while to beat, because it was definitely like I kind of out hit my coverage there a little bit. Is that the sports expression? I don't know sports ball, but you know, it was way too good for where I was at with my skill at the time.
One of the things, it's always fun doing research for any episode of the podcast, but this one I started with some of your early PBs, and I noticed that they were done on emulator. And we've had taskers and people who definitely into the emulation thing on the podcast. And I love that was like your entry point, like to show that, look, you can start here and end up here. Like that was something. Did you have an NES at the time? Just curious why those first couple of runs ended up on emulation, then you moved over to console.
Yeah, the short answer is I just didn't know if that was a hobby I was going to stick with. So I didn't want to drop money on like an NES, on an EverDrive, on a capture card, on an HDMI upscaler, blah, 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 CRT TV, you know. So I was like, oh, I'll just spend $30 on this 8-bit notepad and just play games and see if I like it. And you know, I liked it fine, actually. And later on, I decided to make the jump over to console, and I'm glad I did. But I don't think there's anything wrong with emulation. I think like the Super Mario Brothers world record was done on emulator. Super Mario Brothers 2 Lost Levels world records on emulator. So, you know, I think that there's like this ongoing debate of like, is hardware better than emulation? You know, I think emulator's great, and it's super accessible. It's virtually free. So I think emulators are great. I just played on Nestopia. Like, it wasn't even anything fancy. Like, I didn't have BizHawk or what, you know, I didn't know anything about it. I was like, whatever, it's going to load some save states. You know, it does what I tell it to do. Maybe a little bit later than a CRT and a hardware piece would, but, you know, it was fine. I didn't care, because my muscle memory was trained towards it, right? Actually, like after that 11:45, I was like, oh, you know, my girlfriend found a Sony Trinitron on Nextdoor, so we went and picked it up. threw out her back in the process because it was huge, and I got an NES from a buddy of mine. I bought an EverDrive, and I started playing on hardware. And it actually took me a while to get as good on hardware as I was on emulator because I had to retrain all my muscle memory. So I think in my opinion, it's just a muscle memory issue.
That's
of course, if you have this like. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, if you have this like ancient HD monitor that has like 6 seconds of input delay, yeah, you're going to have a bad time. But anything modern is going to be fine. Like like I was shopping for monitors the other day. It's like input delay 5 milliseconds. I'm like, what is 5 milliseconds is a third of a frame? That's nothing.
Well, and that's and emulation. That's another thing is that it's getting. I mean, the emulation has gotten really good. I mean, just pure and simple. If you play on Virtual Console, on the Wii stuff, it's pretty decent. And to your point, it's literally just taking a time to convert over. Mitch has world records on emulation for Mario 3. Like we see it throughout some of the most competitive games out there. And so I thought that was just really cool. I think it goes to show you that if you're interested at all in speedrunning, just pick it up and give it a try. It doesn't, you don't have to invest. To your point, like at this point, I've invested way too much money in some of this stuff just to get it to work on a TV, But that's the way I just prefer to play it. But like, it doesn't have to be that way. That's the point. And especially with the emulation is getting as good as it has been. So it's pretty cool. And it just took you some time then to convert over when you first did your first console runs.
Yeah.
Very cool. So have you ever, I noticed on your speedrun.com profile, do you speedrun other Castlevania games have you attempted any of those?
Yeah. So, last winter I picked up Castlevania 2 any percent, and I had played a little bit of Castlevania 2 on and off. I played glitchless percent just to kind of familiarize myself with the game because frankly I was intimidated by Castlevania 2 any percent. There's a lot happening in that run. It's an extremely technical run. You have to memorize setups and track subpixels in your head throughout the entire run. So it's a little heavy. So I started with glitchless and I played that for a while, and I think I got like a 3rd place time on that, which I was pretty happy with. But honestly, I kind of hated the run because after a point, there was one RNG element about 30 minutes into the run. And if you got good RNG there, then the rest of the run was basically locked in because there's nothing, you just have to execute these very easy things until the end for the next 5 minutes. So I found myself getting a little bored with that. So I kind of put it down. And then one of my buddies actually made a randomizer for Castlevania 2, which was a lot of fun.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, it was very cool. So I helped him beta test that, probably alpha test actually. So I just did a lot of testing of that. And, I was sitting there, I was like, if I'm going to be in the game, I might as well learn some of these subpixel setups. So I started just kind of because I'm just it's a randomizer. It's not like I'm going for right. a record or anything. I'm just playing through the game. Right. Yeah. So I was like, if I waste 30 seconds here trying to get this floor drop to work, whatever. So I did, and I did learn a lot. And then I was like, well, let me pick up any percent and see if I can get some good runs. And I progressed through that leaderboard pretty quickly. So I was pretty proud of that. I stopped prematurely. I definitely stopped way before I hit my ceiling there. So I plan on going back to that this winter once I'm ready. It could be next week. It could be in a month from now. But I definitely want to revisit Castlevania 2. I was trashing Castlevania 2 a little bit earlier. But Castlevania 2 is a ridiculously fun speedrun. It is so fun. I think the combat and the movement in that game is the best in almost any Castlevania game. The only one I've enjoyed better was Maria in Rondo of Blood. Maria's Bay. So that was good. And then I played Castlevania 3 a little bit. I'm actually not a huge fan of Castlevania 3 speedrun. I think the game itself is a masterpiece. It was, Great. It was like evolutionary to Castlevania 1, but it was a way bigger game. It had multiple characters, non-linear paths. It was just it's a really great game. But I don't really love the speedrun because the movement in the game kind of feels a little clunky to me. Trevor suffers like a 5-frame penalty every time he jumps, which is oh god, it feels like I'm just stuck in a swamp every time I try to move with the guy.
I noticed that just on the casual playthrough. I'm like, what is going? Okay, I'm curious if you had this experience because after playing, I feel like playing 1 and 2 before 3 made 3 a bit more accessible. I didn't find it as challenging as I've heard because I think I was in this groove of playing all these Castlevania games, but that just slight lag. It's so interesting how that impacts the way that you play the game. Like you notice if you're any sort of speedrunner or even just a casual player, you can notice that it's different. It feels different.
Yeah, I actually like when I loaded up the ROM and I'm jumping and I feel like I get stuck to the ground before I jump, and then when I hit the ground I get stuck to the ground. I'm like, what the crap is
What is
this?
going on?
So I'm tripping. I'm like, do I have the wrong ROM here? So I legit go back out to the internet to find another ROM and then load it up, and it's the same thing. I'm like, really? Like, who are the developers that are sitting there like, I feel like these players have been having a little bit too much fun with this jumping, so let's really nerf that. And jumping's too strong. Let's just make them jump slower.
Yeah.
Like, God, what a terrible idea. Let's take something that's fun and make it less fun. Brilliant.
It's a little baffling because I had the same experience. I'm like, what is going on? Like, why would you change that? Of all the things, why is that the thing you decided to change?
Yeah, who knows? But I played a meme category in Castlevania 3. So Castlevania 3, the differences between the Japanese version, which is on Famicom, and the NES version, obviously, or the US version on NES, there's pretty significant differences between those two. So Grant in the Famicom version doesn't. So in the US version, he's got a small dagger. He can attack really fast, and the sub weapons he can get are axe, the throwing dagger, which is like the worst sub weapon in the game, and at the stopwatch, I think. But in the Famicom version, he doesn't get his auto attack. He only throws the sub weapon dagger, and he can't get a double or triple shot on it. So he throws one, and he has to wait for that to either hit a target or leave the screen before he can throw another one. And it doesn't do very much damage. And I think the developers thought that was too overpowered, so they actually didn't let him get a triple shot on his axe throws. So Grant is just really, really, really bad in Castlevania 3 Famicom. So naturally, I wanted to speedrun that.
Of course.
So that's about the extent of my Castlevania speedrunning.
Well, it's I found, as I mentioned before, that the thing that I was great about the NES versions is it felt like some of my skills that I had learned in some of the other games kind of carried over while I was in the NES world on Castlevania, and I appreciated that. One thing I've noticed, and I really, so if you're listening to this, there was just this past weekend there was this great Castlevania tournament. Tusnek took it down, but the Castlevania game, and I noticed this watching some of the GDQ runs as well, makes really a great race speed run. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts why you think that maybe, because it's just really watchable. It's like, it's fun to see the lead. Like, there's anything can happen. I don't know. I'm curious what you think the thoughts are, why it makes such a good race game.
I would probably have difficulty articulating exactly what it is. I know it's a lot of fun, which I know people can't just like, oh yeah, totally, but like it's a lot of fun. It's really fun to just compete, and it's a short run, which I think is great. Yeah. I do enjoy watching like Link to the Past randomizer runs, and I think randomizers are perfect for racing.
Absolutely.
Right?
Totally agree.
But wow, it's like an hour and a half long. Yeah. Like that's so long. A Castlevania runs 12 minutes and it's done. Yeah. So it's a really great game to just kind of hop on to like SRL or Race Time GG with your buddies and just fire off 6 or 10 runs over the course of an evening while you just hang out. The game throws curveballs at you when you fall off script, and a lot of the stuff that you need to do to stay on script is very precise. So we're humans, so we make mistakes, right? And we get thrown off script, and we have to cope with that situation. And it really rewards people that aren't just good at getting any percent PBs. It really rewards people that are good at completing the run no matter what the game throws at them. So, what are your backup strats? How do you recover from every section when you die? Because like a lot of where Simon's power comes from is building up like a repertoire of tools, or like a tool, let's say toolkit of tools. Yes. And if he dies, all of that goes down the drain. And you bring those tools with you, like level to level. So if I get like the holy water in level 1, I'm bringing that to level 2 with me. But if I die in level 2, it may be like a few screens before I see a holy water again. So all these enemies that I was used to killing with holy water, suddenly I have to figure out how to kill with my whip or kill with a different sub weapon. So it gets a little spicy. It gets spicy very quickly. There are a couple of bosses that are pretty trivial, but if they get out of your stun lock, are just mad. Like Castlevania 2 has Castlevania 1 has a couple of the hardest bosses I've ever fought in video games. The Death or Grim Reaper fight is extremely challenging. And the Frankenstein's monster fight is extremely challenging. Luckily in the speedrun, we just stun lock both of those bosses with holy water and whip them down. But if you're just a pixel off and you miss that stun lock, you suddenly have a fight, and you have to this is not something you manipulate anymore. This is something you just have to be like, you have to be sharp. You have to think on your feet. You have to just cope with the situation, And I think the last thing that makes the Castlevania speedrun exciting is the last boss is the hardest part of the game. I always like a game where the last boss, as it should be, right? The last boss should be the hardest part of the game. And, a lot of it comes down to how basically throughout the entire run, you're trying to build up a lead, which is basically a buffer that you can blow on the last boss and hopefully still win. Because the last boss, you can lose a lot of time very quickly by being just slightly off script. It's really like it's common to be on the edge of your seat until the very end, which I think makes it a great race game.
Oh, couldn't agree more. And I think that's articulated so perfectly. If you watch the Salt video again, he spends a significant amount of time we see boss fights, specifically the Dracula boss fight. And I think like a lot of other people who've played the game blind and casual, it took me a few hours to actually beat Dracula. And a lot of it for me was just some of the randomness. I wasn't quite understanding like how he'd appear and when I'd have to hit him. And I never felt like the boss fight was cheap. I just felt like it was really challenging and something that every time I died, it fueled the fire to go back in there and try to work at him. But that's such a good point that you're right. Some of the best part of the game is left into the Dracula fight. And you're right. That absolutely makes for a really good, fun watch for the race. I also think that, you mentioned the timing, it's a short speed run, short-ish, we should say. And that for like a tournament, it's great. You can do 2 out of 3. You can actually have some where you can try to level the playing field as far as some of the RNG things go. And I think that's another good way to approach it if you're doing it in a tournament setting. I think that's really cool as well. So, there's. Do you have a goal time in mind? You're continuing to grind, and if you've dropped by at all a Two-Snack stream, you'll see world record, attempts and everything. You're still trying to bring this time down. Do you have a goal in mind, or is it just something you keep going at?
I don't know. I've kind of just been playing it because it's what I have in my lap to play at the moment. I've been trying to stay sharp for tournament season.
Right.
And now that I've derusted, I kind of want a PB again, but really what the ultimate goal is to break that 1120 barrier. If we could get, and I would be happy. And this is I don't know, this is kind of a weird thing to share, but there are a few peers I have in the community that I think could potentially drive it down as well. I don't think I'm the best Castlevania player when I'm at my best or when they're at their best. I'd probably put myself at like 3rd. So what I would really like to do is I would really like to pull those guys together and be like, let's embark on a quest to push this game to 1119 together. And, let's share strats. Let's work on strats. Let's grind, let's every night of the week, if you get home from work, there's somebody grinding Castlevania world record attempts on Twitch. That would be so much fun. When before I got my first world record, JC had the world record at 1127, and he was the first person to break the 1130 barrier. And his run was like, oh my God, this is the perfect Castlevania run. But starting at the end of 2018 and beginning of 2019, me, Wee, and SBD Wolf were all like, let's make a run for that record. And that was some of the most fun I've ever had in speedrunning. I made really strong friendships with both of those guys. We were in contact every day. We were sharing strats. Like Wee streamed during the day. SBD Wolf streamed in the afternoon because he had to wait for his classes to wrap up, and he's in Italy. And then I was streaming in the evening, and we're all 3 in each other's chats all the time, just talking about strats. And it's crazy how many strats just came of us just kind of BSing about what ifs here and there in each other's chats. And then one of us would pop in the EverDrive or the task and be like, oh yeah, that's a thing. Let's incorporate that. And that was just so fun. Maybe I'm being nostalgic and trying to like grasp that feeling that I had then. But that's the dream, is to get a few guys together, or a few folks together, I should say, and really push the game down to 1119. Because I think it can get there, and I think it can get there within a year if we had the right groups of people working on it.
No, it's not nostalgia. So as a fan and as a viewer of speedruns, first of all, I wish I would have been into Castlevania sooner, because I would have loved to have been a fan at that point watching all these grinds. But then some of the most exciting moments I've, as a fan and as a viewer, have been when everyone's playing Mario 1, everyone's, where there's this group of people going at the Mario 64 64 has been one that happens all the time. You know, it's like where there's this I mean, Ocarina of Time keeps getting broken 7 ways from Sunday. So like, you know, these seeing that it's good for the community. It's just, and it's a total fun thing to be a part of, whether you're watching it or whether you're the person who's grinding down for it. So no, I don't think that's a nostalgia thing at all. I think that's awesome to hear. And I hope at some point that we can all get together to do that. I know real life, unfortunately, gets in the way of some of these things sometimes. So, and you know, you mentioned this. I'm not sure if you've ever felt this before, but we've had others on who have talked about the grind, and sometimes, especially a game, you know, where you're constantly resetting, you know, can take a little bit of a mental toll on you as well. Have you ever felt any of that block or anything like that?
I started to during my grind in 2019. There was a point where it was taking a little bit of a toll on me. Not too bad, but Castlevania has a rough first level. You need 3 frame perfect tricks, and at the time you needed 1 2-frame trick. Now you have 2 2-frame tricks in level 1. So that's a lot of resets in level 1. So, you know, in 2019, there was definitely a toll that it was taking on me. But this past year, I have been impervious to that. I don't know why, but my spirits have been good. Like, I think I'm just in a good headspace where, like, if I plop down, hit the start streaming button, and I start playing Castlevania, you know, I have my buddies, and I have my buddies in chat, you know, just chatting with me about whatever. Like, if you look at my PB, we're not talking about video games. We're not talking about Castlevania. We're talking about this terrible David Lynch Dune movie, you know. So we're just talking about whatever, and that's really helped. And you know, I have no problem with just saying, okay, today I'm going to put in 5. You know, I'm going to hit start stream, and today I put in 5 hours, and you know, we didn't get anywhere, but I feel like I'm getting better, and tomorrow we can go at it again. So I don't know what it is, but it feels good this year. It feels good.
Well, and to be perfectly honest with you, Nick, that's actually kind of where I wanted to go next. It's one of the things that struck me right away about your stream. And just in full disclosure, I only started watching a few months ago. But right away, you mentioned and you say, hey, look, we're going to talk about things other than video games in our chat. We may talk about politics. We may talk about current events. And I immediately latched onto that and appreciated the fact that you're not afraid to take on some subjects that are sometimes tough for people to talk about, but perhaps we should. And I'm curious, was that a thoughtful, have you always been doing that? And was that walk me through the thought process about wanting to engage your Twitch chat that way? Yeah,
So I think underneath it all, it's just stuff that I want to talk about, you know, like I'm generally keeping up with the news, and the world is a crazy place right now, you know. Absolutely. So having a place to kind of talk about this stuff, to share ideas with other real people that aren't just, you know, bloggers or, you know, the press or people that get the most upvotes in Reddit because, you know, they are the winners of today's karma echo chamber, is I think really healthy, right? And you know, I got too many comments that frankly frustrated me in my chat that was like, you know, like real sarcastically, like, oh, I wish we could just focus on video games or something like that. So at that point, I just decided to make it explicit that, you know, like, you know, everything's game here. Everything's game. And that's not to say that if you have like a really whack take on something that I'm not just going to give you the boot, you know. Absolutely. People have shown themselves to have really, in my opinion, terrible opinions on things. And that's not to say that they were just politically different than where I stand on an issue, because I really enjoy engaging people that think differently than I do. Like when I was in college, my business law professor so I'm pretty liberal. I think in like the quadrants, I'm kind of in the green. I'm like liberal libertarianism. Okay. And he was, you know, I'm in quadrant 3. He's quadrant 1. You know, he's authoritarian conservative, right? You know, so we would go to breakfast on Saturday and just chat politics, and it was really friendly. And you know, we found that we actually had a lot of common ground when we talked about issues. But you know, although we thought that the ways that we could solve problems or accomplish goals were different, we found that we still had the same we still had the same goals, you know. So, you know, I really love engaging with people that think differently than I do. Like, how else am I going to get better, right? Like 5 years ago, I was probably more towards quadrant 4, and the more I engage, the more I, and that's going to move, and it'll probably move before I die. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I can't challenge my current, worldview, for lack of a better term, without input from others. And so in my chat, I want other people to hopefully engage in that exercise in good faith as well, and allow themselves to be challenged and to challenge others, and for the most part, it's been pretty good. It's been pretty good. I think people like to just come there. Most of the time, it's just a vent,
right.
Oh my God, did you see what Donald Trump did today? Or, whatever.
Exactly.
So, and that's fine.
And sometimes that's a way to start a conversation, It's like, here's something. So, throughout the podcast, there's been this theme of creating communities that people feel comfortable, like you're saying, sharing some of their ideas and their opinions. And Eon talked about how creating a safe space for people, LGBTQ plus people, was something that was important to her. Author Blues, I was really respecting Author when he was on the stream, because he tweets a lot of times what I'm thinking, but I just can't articulate the way that he tweets it. With yours, I think here's my thought, because I always wonder, we can talk about how change happens or how things can be better for all of us. But a lot of times talk doesn't necessarily make anything any better. Here you have actual real people sharing ideas and learning. One of the things I took away right away within the first week of watching, I'm like, man, learning from one another. This is, I can hear Tusnek like hearing opinions, and he disagrees with it, but at least he's learning from the experience. And I think that's something that, if you're a streamer or if you're a speedrunner, if you're anybody outside of streaming altogether, that's something that really can help you approach life in a new way, and may make your life better, may not, I don't know. But I know that learning and being curious about what other people think and why they think this way and why this is important to them is such a valuable thing. It's part of the human experience, as I like saying. And that's, without getting, waxing too philosophical on you, it's something I reacted to right away. And it seems like something that continues to happen in your stream. It doesn't seem like something you're shying away from anytime soon.
Yeah, I kind of feel like some of it is just kind of exposure therapy, because I do, admittedly, find myself having a hard time being able to put myself in somebody else's shoes, to kind of acknowledge their perspective, and unless their perspective is someplace that I had been in the past, then it's obviously very easy, because I was like, oh, that's what I thought 7 years ago, and here's why I'm here now. So some of it's exposure therapy, but, some of it is also just kind of wishing exposure therapy on others, because, as I say in my about section on my Twitch channel, I think we're really bad at talking about these subjects, because we're encouraged never to talk about these subjects, which is terrible, because, things like politics, things like religion have a profound impact on our day-to-day lives. And, I sit in a position of privilege where, I'm a cis white dude, it still impacts me every day, but it impacts people of color. It affects people in the LGBT plus community, in a much more profound way every day. Women, all
any marginalized group. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
Marginalized group's a better way to say it. Yeah. So, so I feel it to some degree. There have got to be groups out there that are feeling it to a much stronger degree than I do. So I think that's why I think it's so important for us to not be afraid to engage each other, because I think with that practice, and that's kind of what I see it as, is practice. When we can practice doing this and still remain friendly or civil, or not willing to be like, oh God, he loves Second Amendment, screw that guy, he's off the friends list, block. I think that's really going to help us kind of not only build relationships with people that think differently than us, because that's what politics is all about, is, marginally pulling people over to your side and trying to form a majority and getting stuff done. Right. But also just kind of engaging in that dialogue in a respectful way, in a constructive way, and just getting practice at doing that. Because I think if individuals can do this, they can go to Thanksgiving dinner next week and do it with their uncle, and it's going to make the table a little less awkward.
Such a good point. And just to share a quick personal story, you mentioned your relationship with your friend who were on both sides of the political spectrum. I actually have that in my household, and I realized that it was actually a blessing and not necessarily a curse. growing up, my mom was a Democrat. My dad was more of a libertarian. My mom was a Catholic. My dad was agnostic. We had all these different things happening in our house, but we weren't afraid to share our own opinions. And I didn't realize how lucky I was to have that until I met my wife's family, who they just didn't talk politics. It wasn't the current events. It was very much they to this day they're uncomfortable, which by the way is totally fine. But you'd be surprised at how well an understanding you can get of other people by just listening to them. And I think that's another big takeaway I took from it. Like, man, just listening to other people. That's one of the ways that we can work together better, is if we just take the time to listen to other people. I have an opinion. Let's listen to it. I may think you're wrong, but I can at least listen and be empathetic to what you're saying, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, absolutely. There have been a couple times in my stream where someone presents an argument, and like I'm sitting there like, all right, we got to get this frame perfect back crit. All right, we're in level 2. Okay. And I'm sitting there like I'm baking on it in my head. I'm like, you know what? I think you're right about that. I'm feeling that. That kind of vibes with me. Feeling pretty good about that argument. Thank you for presenting it, All right, jump here,
Yeah, right. And then there's the real joy and the craziness of speedrunning that you have to think about a frame perfect input while you're thinking about, well, is libertarianism really it's like one of those things. So that's so cool. I'm glad you keep doing that. And if you're if maybe you've considered doing this with your own stream, what does that look like? I think Two Snakes got a really good example of what it looks like, because I know it can get a little unruly when you have thousands of people in your chat compared to the hundreds or others, but I do think there is a way to make it work, and I really think you've done a good job of that. So thank you for doing that, and I hope you keep it up.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Very cool. So any other games or speedrunning games outside of Castlevania that you've thought about taking on in the future, or do you want to stick primarily with the Castlevania thing?
Yeah, so I've done a little bit of dabbling here and there. Excuse me. I used to speedrun Civilization 6. And I actually snagged a couple of world records in that. I was able to win a game with religion in like under 3 minutes, which was pretty crazy. But since then, those games have been driven much further down. But yesterday I don't know if I'd call it a speedrun. I had a timer going, but I wanted to beat a game of Civ on the slowest turns possible with the most opponents possible on the highest difficulty. And we actually got it on our first try, and it took 11 hours and 20 minutes.
Oh my! I was watching you stream that, and I was like, that lasted 11 hours. Oh my god, dude!
Yeah, that was crazy. My girlfriend and I play. We used to play Cadence of Hyrule, which is the Necromancer Zelda game on Nintendo Switch.
Great game.
That's a super fun game, by the way. Yes. Highly recommend that. But we used to play a lot of co-op of that, and we got pretty competitive. We got a second place time in that. I tried to learn Ninja Gaiden, and I found the mashing on the boss fights at the end was too hard on my arm. Like, I got a mash board and everything, and I felt like my arm hurt, my forearm hurt the next day. And I was like, I'm getting old here. I'm like 37 years old. I'm not trying to like sacrifice my body for like 13th place time on the Ninja Gaiden leaderboard. Like, screw that. So I just kind of stopped. So I would like to get back to Castlevania 2. I feel like I have to try to get a sub 5 minutes in Super Mario Brothers 1 just because I feel like it's a rite of passage.
Oh my god!
Exactly. So I think I would definitely like to do that. But I don't really have anything else on my immediate short list. Some potential ones are like Metroid for NES. I really like that game. Yeah. I played it in a Big 20 last time, and it for the most part enjoyed it. It has some extremely frustrating parts in it, but Metroid is a game I'd like to visit. I've already learned like half of Legend of Zelda, so I'd like to pick that up. But that's like a 2-year-long project. I think Metroid or Zelda is probably one of the hardest, if not the hardest, games on NES to speedrun, just because there's so much in execution and just kind of keeping track of where your memory values are at any given point in the game. So that's really tough. So I might try that out. But maybe just kind of exploring games that I really enjoyed as a kid, like Monsters in My Pocket. Like that game, I loved that game as a kid, and it's kind of similar to Castlevania. So I kind of feel like the I could keep my same stream brand and play through that.
Not abandon the audience.
Now I'm Dracula. I don't know.
I do want to touch. You mentioned Necromancer, and I was doing a volunteer shift at GDQ, and I saw one of I don't remember what year it was, but they were watching people do the inputs for Necromancer. Holy cow! First of all, it was incredible, but I didn't. All the fingers are moving all over the controllers to make that game happen. What do you like about that? If you don't mind, that's a super interesting game.
Yeah, I haven't played too much Necrodancer original. I played a little bit, but I've put probably dozens or if not over 100 hours into Cadence of Hyrule, probably over 100 hours in Cadence of Hyrule. Jeez. And in a lot of ways it's very hard because you have like a very rigid system that you have to follow because everything is done to the beat. But what really helped me get better at the game is when I took a step back and I was like, well, wait a second, if I have 24 beats per minute, then I have almost half a second to do any given input. And I'm sitting here over here playing Castlevania. I'm like, oh, this is a 4-frame window. That's free, You're
right, exactly.
So it's like half a second. Like that's super easy, right? Like I could do that, So that really kind of broke the glass for me and really improved. Kind of got it out of my head because that's the psychological aspect of speedrunning is something that can wear on you a little bit. Yeah. But once I was able to kind of like escape that trap and really think about things in those terms, I got much more consistent at very difficult tricks that I was trying to do, and just had more fun with the game because I realized that it's like, wait a second, I could be a little bit late here. Like I don't have to have like frame perfect execution and stuff. Like I can be like 20 frames late and it's still fine. Like that's crazy, So, while there is like, it's an aggressively difficult game, but it's a lot because it's roguelike. I think that's the challenge that it brings to the table. That's different than a game like Mega Man 2 or Castlevania or Super Mario Brothers is it's roguelike. And, I don't know if your viewers or your listeners are up on roguelike games, but roguelike basically means that you get a random seed every time. And, it has a bunch of other definitions too, but that's good enough. TLDR, you get a random seed every time you have to play through it. So, the challenge of that game is just thinking on your feet and being ready to deal with random situations as they present themselves. Yeah, I don't know. That's my take on
awesome.
Necrodancer and Cadence.
And it sounds fun. I mean, that's the thing. That's like, having to deal with making decisions on the fly. You mentioned that with the Castlevania racing is that, anything could happen there because you have to make decisions on the fly based on what happened, if you die or if you get hit or anything like that. So I think that's always a really fascinating part. I think what's really fascinating too about the roguelikes. And hopefully soon I'm going to have a roguelike developer on because there are so many games out there and it seems to be the category of games seems to be getting large. We seem to have more options now, and it doesn't seem like that's changing, and that's great for speedrunners. That's right up our alley, like having to do all these things on the fly. So
yeah. Have you played Hades?
No, and that's the next one I want to play. It's on the Switch right now. I don't want to play it. I haven't got to it yet.
I've been playing that a little bit the past couple of weeks. That is a lot of fun. Yeah, definitely recommend Hades. It's a fun roguelike.
It's just seeing the way that the movements work and the attacks, it just looks like right up my alley of like stuff that I would really like to do. The gameplay first, kind of thing. Yep. You mentioned something about race season. Is that actually like a thing that happens in Castlevania, or like where there's more tournaments now than other times? Because that's pretty cool that you've had a chance to like prep for that and kind of gear up for it.
Yeah, they tend to gravitate towards Halloween because Castlevania is a horror themed game. So our Retro Gaming Live TV has done a lot of work to promote the Castlevania community.
Absolutely.
Across all the entire franchise, not just Castlevania on NES, but like Castlevania 64, Symphony of the Night, Rondo of Blood, and even into like the 3D Castlevanias. Well, I guess 64 is 3D, but the more modern 3D Castlevanias. So they throw a Castlevania tournament each year on or around Halloween. So this year, Speed Gaming also threw an event just after Halloween. So that was really convenient.
That's really cool. I'm glad to see that there's popularity around it. And I was watching. There was hundreds of other viewers watching. Like it was a fun weekend to watch Castlevania because the races were really good. Like it was just great commentary. Like everything about it, I really enjoyed it. And you're right, the ones I've watched on RGL are fantastic as well. So that's I'm glad to hear that it's being promoted that way because it is. It's a great celebration of what you all are doing and the grind and everything. And anybody has a chance. That's the thing, It's like you 2 out of 3. Like there's some really great options and opportunities. I think that's really cool. It's been a ton of fun talking with you and getting to know a little bit about you and your stream and the speedrunning and everything like that. Thanks so much for taking the time to do this. Where can people find you on the internet and everything like that?
Yeah, so I try to stream at least 3 or 4 days a week at my Twitch channel. That's just 2SNEK, 2SNEK. And other than that, I'm trying to continually put content out on YouTube. I took a couple months off there, but I'm trying to do my best to make Castlevania 1 as accessible as possible. So you'll find me uploading speedrun tutorials pretty often. And also, like, if you have something that you're struggling with and you want to come by my channel, I'm happy to just pop in the EverDrive and talk through what I'm thinking about when I go through that screen with you live. But you can also request tutorials. So one of the tutorials I'm working on right now is how do you get the stopwatch drop to happen in level 1 before you get to the first door, which is tough. So and there's a lot of RNG in there. So I have a lot of video editing to do between each different pattern and what to do for each one. But that's that was requested by a guy named Zatoriak. He came into my channel. He was like, man, I'm really struggling. And he didn't say that. He's like, hey, can you make a stopwatch tutorial for me? I was like, yeah, I got you, man. So been working on that and just trying to get content up there that's very descriptive, not too long, because the worst is when you're like, man, I want to learn how to screen scroll in Zelda. How can I do that? And you go look on YouTube, and every tutorial is either like it doesn't say anything and it just shows it shows it happening. You're like, oh, that's not helpful. Or it's like a 2-hour-long tutorial. Like, man, how do I find it in this 2-hour-long tutorial? So I'm trying to make succinct, 5-minute videos that hit you with a concept, give you everything you need to know. And of course, you have more questions, just drop by my Twitch channel and talk to me. I'm also pretty active on Twitter. As you can probably guess, there is a healthy amount of political commentary on Twitter. But if you want to reach out to me on Twitter with anything, I think that's just at 2_SNEK. I don't know who the crap out there is rocking at 2SNEK, but they're kind of like invading my space a little bit, even though they had the screen name first. So
brutal.
Come on off that if you're listening.
Help us out. Come on. If you're out there, please.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if you answer this, but do you mind, how did you come up with that screen name? That's kind of interesting. I forgot to ask about that, actually.
That was Civilization based, actually. So in Civ 6 and probably all the Civilization games, I've only played Civilization 5 and Civilization 6, but in Civ 6, you found a religion eventually in your civilization, and you can either use one of like the prepared ones, like Protestantism or Buddhism or whatever, right? Islam. But you can also, like, they have some generic icons to make like your own religion. And I would always go as like Snake, because there was this one that kind of looked like an earthworm. So I was like, I am Snake or whatever, right? So I was playing one day at my house with my girlfriend and my buddy Henry, and somebody had already taken the snake icon. And then there's another icon that kind of just like looks like 2 squiggly lines. And I think it's supposed to be like heat or something, but they kind of look like 2 snakes. And I was like, like the meme on the internet is to spell snake S-N-E-K. So I was like, 2SNEK, and it got a good laugh out of my girlfriend and our friend Henry. So, if you laugh at my jokes, then that's going to stroke my ego enough to affect major decisions for the rest of my life. So when I made a Twitch channel to, stream my 14-minute Castlevania runs to viewers, I decided it was a good idea to just use the Civilization meme that we came up with a couple weeks earlier.
Well, it worked perfect.
Here we are.
I would think it was unique until I saw your Twitter handle had the underscore. I'm like, what the hell? Who in the right mind would have that? Because I was like, this is a unique name. But no, go figure. I gotta love Twitter. Well, I appreciate. Thanks for taking us through all this, and I really do appreciate it. And best of luck with the continued grind. I'm sure the world record is going to happen again. Just a matter of time and when it will. So, thanks again for doing this, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for reaching out. I've had a ton of fun. This has been great.
Thanks everyone for listening and watching. If you're enjoying the podcast, subscribe, leave a review. All those things go a long way to helping out the podcast. If you'd like to continue the conversation, I'm on Twitter @LatMackey, or you can also join the LatMackey Discord, where we have a sequence break channel. We talk about guests, we have questions. It's really interactive, really fun. Please feel free to stop on by. Thanks so much. See you in the next one.